Hello, everybody. Hope everybody's doing okay. I'm going to start another topic here on Igor Stravinsky, which I'll post to the YouTube channel. Um, Today I'm going to try and just talk about the music and not play it through through a Spotify. The recordings had a lot of feedback. My computer's got a lot of feedback whenever it's cranked, and so what I think I'll do is just reference all these items that are on the YouTube listening channel, which you can find on my other YouTube channel, which we've been using all semester. So I'm just going to talk about the music, and we'll see how that works. If you don't like it, you can email me, and we can get back to maybe doing the Spotify just for some example. It's good to hear it, especially as you're talking about it. So what I'd recommend you to do for today is, listen to what I have to say and maybe hit pause and then go to the YouTube channel to listen to sort of selections of these pieces, and then and come back to this video and uh, put it in context. So we are talking about Igor Stravinsky today, very seminal figure in the history of 20th century music. Um, Here he is. Dates 1882 to 1971. He was Russian. He was a Russian composer. Early roots were sort of romantic. He trained with one of his teachers was Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov, who was one of the members of the Russian Five. We talked about the Russian Five with regards to Mussorgsky, and Rimsky-Korsakov was sort of responsible for doctoring up a lot of Mussorgsky's scores, making them seem a little more uh, suitable for the listening public. And there's been some criticism about this, whether he should have left Mussorgsky's original intact. I didn't talk about Rimsky-Korsakov, but Stravinsky drew upon sort of that romantic element in his early years, and you hear some of that in one of his early ballets. The Firebird is probably the most romantic of the three of those, but the Firebird, Petrushka, and the Rite of Spring, all from 1910, 1911, and 1913, respectively. So we remember Stravinsky today more as a modernist. I'm going to do a whole other video on what modernism actually was, so we can put that in context. But in music, it had to do with breaking tradition and inventing something new. And you do this in several ways. Sometimes by looking back, like with neoclassicism, and bringing back old forms because it's not romantic. Sometimes it's strengthening the musical language, making it more dissonant. Maybe not strengthening, but freeing the diatonic elements, the typical chord relationships that we've had so far. And this isn't a theory class, but just trying to explain it the best I can. The music is saturated with these kind of bristly sounds. It's a little bit grinding to the ear. This becomes very popular for modernists like Stravinsky to sort of gravitate to. He's most famous for these three ballets. These really spark him as a leading figure when he's a young man. He writes these for the Ballet Russe. This is a Russian ballet company that was popular in Paris. I think they had a Paris run of all these ballets. And the impresario Sergei Diaghilev had hired Stravinsky to write music for ballets that were mostly about Russian stories. Not all of them were, but these three sort of they don't come from Russian folklore. I mean, Rite of Spring is sort of invented. It's sort of idealized, well, maybe not idealized, but sort of an invented pagan past, where the Petrushka is set in Russia during Eastertide. What makes these pieces modern? A couple things here. Firebird, like I said, has a sort of romantic element to it. A sweep. I'll post a link to that, the suite, on YouTube if you can have a listen to that. But Stravinsky adopts several techniques that were counter-romantic. So white music being one of them. So what is white music? Okay, so imagine a piano keyboard. If you play all the white keys, typically, if you start, that's a C major scale. You start from C to C, you play all the white keys, you got a C major scale. But what pandiatonicism is, or what white music is that those are all kind of free to mingle with each other. So you don't have to always come back to C. If you're in the C major scale, you can have other notes that are the focus. Sometimes this is modal writing, but you free up your harmony, you free up your melodic writing to the point where you don't follow traditional rules. So that's what we sometimes called pandiatonicism. There's also the wrong note technique. This is more of a tongue-in-cheek idea, but Stravinsky would actually add wrong notes to chords just for the bristly sound. So you maybe throw a C sharp into a C chord, or an F sharp into or a chord, or the Petrushka chord. It's not really a wrong note chord, but you combine a C major triad with an F sharp major triad, and that really grinds. I mean, you have what's called the tritone. The tonus diabolus from the Middle Ages. This interval that was hard to avoid. You were supposed to avoid it because it was hard to resolve that dissonance. So he takes that and plays with it. So the wrong note technique, just throwing wrong notes into a standard practice harmony. And then, of course, using something called the octatonic scale. This, again, without the use of a piano, I'm going to try to explain this the best I can. It's a series of alternating half steps and whole steps. So it's a very chromatic kind of scale. I have two of them here. They're actually, I think, 3 octatonic scales. I've given you 2 of them. And so, you can see it here. C and C, those are sharps, the plus, or not the plus sign, the number sign, sharps. C, and but this means C and C sharp is a half step. C sharp and D sharp would be a whole step, and so forth. So you have half step, whole step, half step, whole step. So you have 8 notes in an octave, as opposed to 7 notes in an octave. So without repeating a note. So if you take the standard C major scale, if it's an octave, that's what octave stands for, 8. But you're repeating the note C at the octave. Here you have 8 notes, and you're not to the octave yet. So hence the term octatonic scale. So it's been used by other composers. He didn't invent this. There were early precedents. I think Rimsky-Korsakov may have experimented with this, some of his pieces. So late Romantics were interested in chromaticism. Wagner particularly writing harmonies that fell well outside of the major-minor tonality, or sometimes unresolved chords, or like the Tristan chord, which is sort of dissonant, and he just kind of sits on it. It doesn't resolve it. These are some of the technical aspects of modernism, or the technical aspects that lead up to modernism. So, and Stravinsky's are sort of key in all this. But like I said, there's more to this music than just a technique. It's the ideology as well. And Stravinsky is very much, like I said earlier in the slide, he's a musical chameleon. So he changes his direction quite a lot. I'll talk a little bit about Petrushka here. It's a ballet, one of the Ballet Russe ballets. The story, it's about 3 puppets. Actually, it's set in Eastertide. It's a Shrovetide fair in Russia. And there's a magician, and there's a puppet master comes along, and he brings these 3 puppets to life who play out their jealousies and their relationships. Essentially what happens is Petrushka is in love with the ballerina, and she's in love with the Moor, and Petrushka and the Moor fight, but the Moor ends up killing Petrushka. So it seems like a tragedy, but at the very end, Petrushka's ghost is seen on top of the building, shaking his fist, and you get this little quote of the Petrushka theme, bringing it all, rounding it all out. So the Russian story ballet. What Stravinsky does musically is sometimes mix meters together. You'll have a meter of 3 maybe against a meter of 2, or a meter of 7 against a meter of 3. This creates a very kaleidoscopic effect. It's collage. You mix meters on top of one another. He's very fond of doing this. So really challenging the ears. It's something that was very difficult to do. It's a very difficult score to pull off, especially that opening section, the Shrovetide Fair. Today, it's mostly popular as a concert work. three of these ballets are, they're usually played as concert pieces, not as ballets. With some exceptions, I've seen the Firebird performed, or yeah, live here in Boston or in Cambridge, actually. So they are done, usually modern versions of the dance, but they are more popular as concert pieces. And because they go with a story, there's a narrative element. So you can follow the characters of the story in Petrushka the way you can in like Symphonie Fantastique by Berlioz. So you can follow the characters, Petrushka, the ballerina. They all have themes. Petrushka's got that Petrushka chord. It's got this very angular, very aggressive kind of theme that kind of stands out. I'll post that to the YouTube channel and have a listen, at least to some of it. It's fairly lengthy. It's about half an hour in length to listen to the whole thing. Maybe I don't have time for that, but do take a listen. I'll talk about Rite of Spring briefly here, then I'll have to do a part 2 to this video. But the Rite of Spring is Stravinsky's sort of makes him a young punk for the day. Right? So, this is what puts him on the map, so to speak, in music history. Music historians love to talk about Rite of Spring. Some of it's overstated, but it's another ballet, one of the Ballet Russe ballets. It's about a young girl in pagan Russia who is asked to dance herself to death. It's a spring sacrifice. That's what it's about. So you're sacrificing this young girl to the gods of nature for a bountiful harvest in the future. So the spring sacrifice. Caused a bit of a stir in its day, although it's not totally clear on when this happened. It was performed. There are records that say there was a riot at its premiere in May of 1913 in Paris. I'll tell you some of these stories in the second video. But the most of the news reports about it being a riot didn't come out to about 1924. So it might be overstated. It's kind of a cliche in music history courses. Oh, it caused a riot. Ballet caused a riot. And we'll talk about why it was so riotous. The music had to do with some of it. The dancing had another part of it. A lot of the dancing was stomping around and sliding your feet, and it challenged traditional notions of what dance was. This is not Tchaikovsky's Nutcracker. This was very aggressive, angular kind of movement, and the music kind of fit this. So that octatonic scale that we talked about comes back here in earnest. A lot of chromaticism, a lot of sometimes mixing two chords at the same time for the sheer dissonance. In the opening dance has this aspect. It was reconstructed in 1987 by the Joffrey Ballet. I've got the full thing on the YouTube channel. If you get a chance to watch it, do watch it and get a sense of what this sounds like and what it looks like, because this is I think what we know of is the original dance and the original costumes. They're basically sackcloth and the original scenery. Highly interesting. And I'm going to finish up here, and I'll open up the next video by talking about why it was a scandal, like the reports about the scandal. So, all right, see you in a bit.